Welcome to the April conference call. I can't believe we're in British summertime already. That seems a bit strange. First few months have gone really quickly, I guess, because of all the busyness with the aid cuts and the global health replenishments and all of the other things. This month we're going to be talking about education, which is also affected. So um, we'll come to that in a minute. I don't think there's anyone on the call who's this their first time here, but I will start off with the usual housekeeping. So please do keep yourself muted during the call, and if you've got any questions or comments, please use the chat box. We've got the captions on already, so they're there if you want to turn them on or off, and we will be recording the call as always and putting it on our website in due course. So if you don't want to be recorded, then please feel free to turn your cameras off. So if that's all right, we will get going with the usual kind of headlines about what's been in the news that's affected Results' advocacy. Obviously, we've all been very concerned about the cuts to the official development assistance or ODA budget, and sadly the news hasn't been getting any better recently. I want to start by a massive thank you for all of you who've been making really magnificent efforts to make a noise about this in the last month or so. We've actually had the biggest response to any grassroots action request since the very significant cuts by the last government back in 2021, when we tried to get MPs to vote against the cuts, if you remember that. Sadly, this current government hasn't listened to our arguments, and any increases to the defence spending, we believe, need to come from other budget lines and not ODA. They have not listened to that, and they have not heeded our suggestions that with those cuts, if you remember, they were scheduled to come in 2027. We said we needed to use the existing budgets that had been set for 2025 and 2026 to meet those important funding commitments that are coming up now, including Nutrition for Growth, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Global Fund to fight HIV, TB, and malaria. And that's this year. Then we've got next year, Education Cannot Wait, and the Global Partnership for Education. The government's spring statement, which was issued by the Chancellor last Tuesday, closed that argument down as well, announcing that the budget would be tapered down from 0.5% of gross national income this year to 0.48% in 2025-26, and 0.34% in 2026-27, then to 0.3% in 2027-2028. Is how they want it to work. And that obviously even further reduces that tapering, further reduces the budget space available to meet these important commitments. And this makes it even harder to believe the government's standard response that I think many of you have been receiving in response to your letters, that they plan to raise ODA to 0.7% when conditions allow. This obviously runs just directly contrary to their actions. In the chat box, I'm going to share a response from BOND, the International Development Umbrella Body, that has made a comment on this announcement, and it also includes the figures I've just shared. So that's just gone in the chat box now. Really big thank you to all of you what you're doing to express your concerns about this. I can't hide the fact that things are looking pretty dark right now, with ODA effectively at its lowest percentage for 25 years. I don't think anyone could have expected that from this government, but that's where we are. We've also seen some pretty stark analysis from the One campaign about what this actually means for development programs in reality. And again, I'm going to share a link to that data in the chat. It's really powerful. So what is the impact of those cuts on the numbers of people needing vaccinations, for example, or health treatments, or on children not getting the education they need? There's a figure, if you follow that link, that hit me pretty hard, which was that there will be over 600,000 fewer child deaths will be averted because of projected cuts to the Gavi funding. I find that shocking and distressing, and I think one thing that we need to do is to try and find ways to make these figures, this impact, sink in with MPs so that they really understand the enormity of what the government has done, and particularly given that it's all along, it's stating that it's still committed to global health. You might have seen that in some of your replies. So that's pretty bad news, I'm afraid. Another thing that's going to, so looking forward, the first thing that's sort of been planned, I suppose, is another joint lobby of Parliament to protest against the cuts and meet MPs in person. Several of you joined the last lobby day we had in February. That was before the cuts were announced, and obviously they were announced anyway. So now we're coming together with other agencies in the sector to basically have another event. We want it to be twice as big as the last one, so we're aiming to reach hopefully around about 100 MPs. And this is going to be on Tuesday, the 20th of May, which is timed to be just before the government's spending review. So we don't have all the full sign-up details yet, but I'll send them round. In the meantime, if you are interested in coming to Westminster to meet your MP, you have to invite them in advance. But if you're interested in being part of this event, then please let me know, and I'll send you the information about that event as soon as we can. I am just trying to find the link to that, and I've gone and lost it. There we go. No. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the link for the chat. There we go. Right. So, yeah, if you're interested, let me know and we'll send it out. So, on to some slightly better news. Last week, Results staff were in Paris for the Nutrition for Growth, or N4G Summit. Various staff, including Kitty, who's on the call. Hi, Kitty. And they were there to, so as well as the summit itself on the Thursday and Friday, there were numerous side events during the week before where organisations could share new ideas and responses to the crisis in malnutrition. We launched the latest in a kind of short series of what we're calling good news briefings on nutrition. And they're basically exactly that, good news, things that people can do that are actually helpful in spite of the difficulties with funding these programs. And this was one on the topic of what's called integration, which is where by ensuring that nutrition and other health and education interventions are carried out at the same time, you can achieve better and longer lasting benefits. Now, that sounds probably pretty obvious, but it's definitely that sort of efficiency and effectiveness is needed more than ever, and particularly given these cuts. And so I'm just going to put a link to that briefing that we produced. It's quite an accessible one, and that's going into the chat. And I've also just put in a little link to some social media of the event. You can see Alex, our colleague at the event, who was on the speaker panel. The good news is that the N4G process, which was led by the French government, resulted in nearly 28 billion US dollars commitments from donors around the world, which is really, really good. And that compares to 27 billion pledged last time around in Tokyo in 2021 and 23 billion in London back in 2013 when this Nutrition for Growth process started off. Thank you for all your support for the replenishment this year. We asked you to campaign on this, particularly back in January. Sadly, the UK did not feel able to be amongst the 106 countries that pledged financial resources. I have just had a note to say that my lobby date is wrong, and it isn't the 25th of May. It's completely correct. It was the Tuesday, the 20th of May. That was not a deliberate mistake. I've put different dates in different places, and I thought I'd caught them all. Thank you. So the lobby I mentioned about the ODA cuts, Tuesday, the 25th of May. Sorry, Tuesday, the 20th of May. 25th is a Sunday. I'll get there eventually. I'm going to put it in the chat just so you won't hear me get it wrong again. There you go, 20th of May. Oh. Right, so we weren't amongst the countries that pledged, so that 27 billion is not from the UK, part of it is not from the UK, which is disappointing. The new UK's Development Minister, Baroness Chapman, attended the summit. She didn't make a very impressive speech, I'm afraid, but she did announce the UK's idea for a new global compact for nutrition integration. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it describes what's, and I quote, a collective effort to mobilise, sustain and implement nutrition integration commitments. And that will be by a wide range of partners across economic growth, productivity, trade and climate resilience that until now may not have been explicitly prioritising nutrition. So that's their words. What that means in reality, I'm afraid we don't yet know, but it does commit to that integration of nutrition interventions with other kinds of activities, including things like economic growth and building climate resilience. So that's a good thing, even though no new money has come from the UK. Overall, it has to be said that the summit was a bit disappointing. So, for example, it didn't deal with things like the importance of debt relief or tax reform for nutrition funding that we were talking about just before Christmas. And our Senior Policy Officer on Nutrition, Sunit Bagri, has written a set of recommendations just before the summit, which again, I'll link to in the chat box. These should give you a bit of a sense of, what these announcements kind of were missing from, what was missing from the summit. So I'm just linking you to 3 links there. Sunit's article about what we were hoping for. Then there's the official press release of the summit. And if you want to see what that thing that Baroness Chapman announced, the Global Compacts for Nutrition Integration, that's there in the chat as well. Next, I would like to report that World TB Day was, obviously many of you know, 24th of March. We held an event in Westminster on behalf of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, or APPG, on global tuberculosis to discuss the TB response both globally and in the UK. So this was also the formal relaunch of the APPG in the new Parliament. Obviously, that's taken a bit of a while now. So results provides the secretariat for that APPG. So we service them, we help the MPs do what they want to do. And we're really pleased that this very active group of parliamentarians is now up and running again. That's a really good result. To mark World TB Day, our colleague Sahira Ramzan, who many of you know, also wrote a blog post for World TB Day about some of the challenges and misconceptions that we still have around this disease. And again, I'm going to post that in the chat. It's a very compelling, although obviously given the subject matter, somewhat sobering reading. And I've just noticed in the chat that Kitty has said, we're hoping the UK will make a financial commitment to nutrition later this year, possibly November. And obviously, any advances on that, we've been asking you to campaign on it. We will keep you informed to see what the results of our, our campaigning and advocacy is. So it's high time I just went through kind of what you've been doing around the UK. So as I said, obviously, a massive thank you to all of those of you who have really been pulling out the stops to oppose these aid cuts. We believe that many Labour MPs are privately and even not so privately kind of against the changes, but we are seeing this standard party line response about how they need to, somehow pay for defence spending, which is obviously not necessary that comes from the ODA budget. Thank you to everybody who's shared their actions and responses they've received, including Tony, Corinne, Karen, Deirdre, Glynis, Peter, Anne, Michelle, Richard, Jill, Ricky, Pete, and I'm sure there's some I've forgotten and didn't include in that list. Big thank you to all of you. We monitor the wording of every response that we see, and even if it's the standard wording, it does help us to track their response. We even when they disagree with us, they still had to send that response and have become aware of that pressure. So thank you. What happens next, I think it's fair to say, isn't clear. We don't know how it will affect, for example, the Gavi replenishment, which is now expected in June, or that potential additional nutrition money. We just don't know. Lastly, I think before I introduce our speaker for the evening, time's getting on, I'd like to just quickly introduce another colleague who you may have seen on the call, which is Will Sewell, who is our new Campaigns and Communications Officer, replacing Jess, who left at the end of last year. Will, do you want to just say hello and introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, Naveed, and hi everyone. Really nice to meet you all. Yeah, I'm Will. I'm the new Campaigns and Communications Officer at Results. I've been here just over a month now, and it's been really exciting, kind of getting into the swing of things, learning more about the organisation and the grassroots network. I went to last month's London gathering hosted by Stephen, which was also a really great way to kind of get a sense of the grassroots work done at Results. And I guess I'm just really looking forward to getting to know everyone, kind of through our campaigns and events and other activism. So yeah, kind of really looking forward to all that going forward. So yeah, thanks, Naveed.
Great, thank you, Will. So now let's introduce our guest speaker for the evening. Welcome, Hannah. Are you on the call?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Hannah. So Hannah is the Senior Policy and Parliamentary Advocacy Officer for Education here at Results. Hannah, big welcome to you. You're on the call, as you know, with Results campaigners from right around the UK, all ready to ask you some questions about the current state of play with education. Obviously, it's so important for getting a good start in life and is missing from the experiences of so many children around the world, particularly in lower and middle income countries. Before we go into our questions that we've prepared for you, would you be able to just quickly introduce yourself, your role at Results, and kind of a little bit about maybe what motivates you to work on the issue of global education?
Sure. Thanks, Naveed, and hello, everybody. It's been a little while since I've been to a grassroots call, but I have been to one, and I think I recognize a few people on here, so it's good to see all of you again. I'm Hannah, as Naveed said, and work on between both the policy and the parliamentary teams at Results UK, focusing on education. I've been at Results for about 2.5 years now, and have really enjoyed working across the brief, and also with our partners at Send My Friend to School, which is the network of kind of all the organizations that are working on education in the UK. We focus at Results on kind of foundational learning issues. So those are the issues that concern kind of the basic things that students need to get out of primary school in particular, the kind of foundational skills that allow students to build in their education, like reading and mathematics, social emotional skills, kind of the baseline things that are really kind of a benchmark of what a quality education entails. There are huge issues with a lot of students going to school and still not gaining these skills. And so this is the main focus of our advocacy towards the UK, because the UK has long been one of the biggest donors to this issue around basic education, and we want to make sure that they continue to do so. But as Naveed has kind of teed up, there has been an issue with the UK kind of retreating in its support for education for quite a while, which is also impacting its prioritization of basic education. And so our campaign this month is focusing on trying to get education to be recognized as more of a priority within the development budget. And I can go into more details, Naveed, if this would be a good time, or we can go straight into questions. I don't know how much everybody has read the campaign briefing.
I suspect some will, some won't. So let's go into the questions. Thank you, Hannah. That's really a good starting point. I think we've got the first. So the first of the pre-arranged questions, as we normally have, should be coming from Scotland. Is that right?
Yes.
Hi, Bevanley.
Asking the question. Hi, Naveed. Thank you.
Go ahead with the question.
Yeah. Hi, Hannah. My question would be regarding education and the efforts being made worldwide. What progress do you think has been made all over the world, especially with, different contexts that we have? We have regions with war and other situations like that. So how far has the efforts gone? What progress has been made on education to make sure that every child has quality education?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. And I think that it's important for us to take a long view when thinking about the amount of progress that we've made on education. There's been a huge amount of progress that has been made over the last 40 years. We're seeing more children in school than we've ever seen in terms of volume. We're seeing a lot of progress in terms of getting girls more involved in school, ensuring that there are more different types of education available to students that need different types of learning environments. And a lot of countries have made a lot of progress, especially the ones that have invested in it and have actually put money towards it. And there are some real regional case studies, particularly in South Asia, where countries have completely turned their education systems around in the last 40 years and now have really thriving education systems that are working really well, even though a lot of these countries are still fairly low income. However, we have not seen the kind of progress that we have needed to see to ensure that every child can go to school. And it has actually been quite a big issue over the last 20 years. There was a good amount of momentum that happened around after 2000 when there was the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, where there was a goal around universal primary education, which is every child going to primary school. But it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough investment in that goal, and it was realized that that goal needed to be much broader to actually ensure that every child got the benefits of education, because you need more than just enrolling in primary school to be able to gain the full benefits of education. You need to make sure that you're actually learning your basic skills when you're in primary school, and then ideally you need to go continue that education, and so you grow and have a place to go into secondary and tertiary school, and making sure that those kinds of opportunities are available to children. And so the Sustainable Development Goal 4 really worked on that in 2015. And since 2015, we have not seen a lot of progress on that goal. So SDG 4 was always kind of a tricky one to get like movement on, but there has been kind of a decline in investment compared to what we were seeing early in the 2000s. There's a marked difference actually in the amount of money that was going towards education, and it has shifted the speed, the rate of progress on the SDGs. And so in the last 10 years since SDG 4 was adopted, there's actually only been a 1% decline in the number of out-of-school children. Conflict is a really big reason for that. So there's been an uptick. There's also a huge issue with a lot of children going to school and not gaining basic skills. Only 1 in 5 children in sub-Saharan Africa are achieving basic metrics on literacy and numeracy. And our colleagues at IPNED, the International Parliamentary Network for Education, they just released a briefing on Zambia, where they found that only 4 out of every 100 children in grade 2 are able to read at the expected level. So huge amount of work that needs to be done. Part of this is due to massive teacher shortages. 44 million teachers are estimated to be needed in sub-Saharan Africa or around the world. And in sub-Saharan Africa, the percentage of trained teachers has fallen since 2000. So there used to be 85% of teachers were trained. Now it's just 64% in 2022. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And as I think everybody who's been through an education realizes, education is really, really essential, not just to personal goals, but to economic growth, to adapting to our changing climate, to ensuring that we have skills that are needed to make communities work, like healthcare workers and social workers and all the other kinds of skilled workers that you need, and skilled community members who are able to take care of each other and thrive together. And without education, it's really hard to see how we move forward. So this is a really important issue, and there's a lot of work to be done. Even though there's been some big progress, like I said, there's been significant more children than ever in school. The rate or the total number of out-of-school children is still low, but the rate of out-of-school children has halved in sub-Saharan Africa. There's just been a huge amount of population growth. Like the number of children in sub-Saharan Africa has doubled in the last 20 years. So it's just not keeping up with the pace of the world, and conflicts are costing more money. There's all these other things that are making it that we need to keep investing. And at this moment, when we need investment more than ever, people are pulling back on their investments.
Thank you, Hannah. That's gosh, that's a really very wide-ranging overview. I'm sure there's a lot of things there that people will want to delve into when we get into the sort of open questions from the floor. So I'm hearing, good progress around the time of the millennium, but that's stalled, particularly in the last 10 years. Lots of big challenges around that reduction in investment needed. So thank you for that overview. Let's move on to our second question, and then people can kind of dive in to that later. But the second question, I think, is from Paul.
Hello, yes. Hi, Hannah. Hi, Naveed, yeah. Hi, Hannah. I think we can all accept that education is very important. It's obvious. But actually, now our international aid budget has been shrunk so much, is it actually realistic to expect to spend money on education now?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's really important to talk about this issue kind of in terms of priorities rather than just dollar or pound amounts. The main story of the big report that was just released by Send My Friend to School is that the percentage of the budget, like the proportion of the ODA budget that has been going to education, has experienced a dramatic decrease over the last 10 years. So internationally, the target is that countries spend 15%, 15 to 20% actually, of their ODA budget on education. And this has been kind of reinforced multiple times as what's needed from the donor community. There have been lots of conversations about how to fairly divide up the amount of money that donors have in their budgets so that that issues are prioritized in the fairest way based off of what's most important. The UK used to be very close to that target. They were at 13.5% back in 2013. Today, they're down to 3.5. So that's a massive decrease. And during the last ODA cuts, during the reduction that we saw in COVID 2020, and it was announced 2021 enacted, education was one of the worst affected sectors. So for 2 years running, the Independent Commission on Aid Impact, ICAI, they identified education as one of the sectors that changed the most out of all issues that are spent on in the UK government for development. And we are worried that with new cuts ahead, that this will happen again. This all happened while the UK government was saying that education was one of their main priorities. There's actually like documented evidence of the past UK foreign secretary saying that nothing would happen to girls' education, that girls' education was one of their prime issues. It was something that they were going to be focusing on and that it would be protected. And at the same time as he said that, we saw a 54% reduction in programming for girls' education. So there's been a real misalignment between what the UK has been saying they are prioritizing, what they care about, and what they've actually been spending their money on. Education needs to be a bigger part of what they're doing. And they're talking about education as being an important part of their agenda, and it's just not matching up with the amount of money. So in this reduced aid budget, we know that we might not see the total volume of what we really need, to be quite frank, in the space. We need way more money to be able to achieve global goals. But what we want is for the UK at this moment to just get their priorities right and make sure that education is given its due, at the right percentage for what is needed to make sure that things are fair.
Thank you, Hannah. Again, I'm sure we'll kind of come and unpick that in terms of the UK's contribution. I just wanted to pick up on something you said in your previous answer, actually, which I forgot to mention, is that I've just posted in the chat the link to the policy briefing that from the International Parliamentary Network on Education that you mentioned. So this is just to show an example of how the need for funding education is picked up in a country that's actually trying to do that. So it's not just all about the UK. So it's really important to see that we're working in kind of not just, our work in the UK complements, education campaigners in other countries as well and around the world. So if you're interested in seeing a sort of a case study from another country and how that funding works there, then that's a really interesting little article there. Right, I think we're ready for our third question. I think is coming from South Cambridgeshire. Is that right? Yes,
yeah,
it is.
thanks, Naveed. Yeah. Hi, Hannah. So my question was, what can volunteers do to help the prioritization of education? And also, what do you think we can realistically achieve?
Yeah, I think that you all have the most important job of anybody. It's so incredibly important that MPs are hearing from their constituents on this. It is like the number one thing that needs to happen right now. They're not responding to like kind of grand appeals on things, even if there are things that MPs feel are really important personally, unless they have the mandate from their constituents, they're not going to do anything at this moment. So it's really, you all have such a valuable role, and I'm so grateful to the work that all of you are doing and making sure that you're holding your elected officials to account. Because it really is, I think, what is going to move the needle. It's not going to be me so much. It's going to be collective action. So I think that writing to your MP and basically like not letting them forget about education is really important. Pointing out that there are other things that have been getting a lot more of the budget than is, something that they should be working on right now. For example, like private capital investments have gone way up in the last few years, at the same time that education has been going way down. I don't need to tell you much about in-donor refugee costs. I'm sure you've all heard a lot about that. When we were developing the report, we'd made a graph with like kind of how education has been deprioritized compared to other sectors. And we kind of broke it down by different issues. We had to remove donor refugee costs because it ruined the graph. It was so far out and away that you couldn't see the difference between other issue areas. So we had to just pull out that data and then talk about it in narrative, because it's just far and away above all the other issues. So there's a lot that they can do to move things around. And it's really critical that those conversations are happening and that they know what kinds of things people want to see spent on, and education being one of them, in addition to health and all the other really essential services, because education relies on all these other basic services and human services that deliver human rights. You can't have a successful education system without children that are fed. You can't have a successful education system without transport and healthcare. Those are all really essential things. And we're not trying to pit ourselves against other basic issues. We just have recognized that education has been particularly deprioritized and has particularly suffered over the last 10 years, and especially since the last cuts. And that while we're having these conversations, we need to make sure that basic services are protected and that services that have been unduly deprioritized get back up into the agenda. So this is a really timely moment for action. They're actively making decisions about this, and education is not being talked about nearly enough. We're working really hard to change that narrative and get education back into kind of the conversation, so that when they come up with their spending allocations with the little money that is left, that education is one of those areas that they're working on, because there's a real chance that it won't be. So you can make a real difference on that. It's really important that they retain some ODA to education because we have two really major funds that are up for replenishment in 2026. So I know that there's a bunch of funds that are asking for money right now, which is concerning everybody in education because we're worried that we'll just get forgotten. And by the time 2026 comes up, the Global Partnership for Education, which works on systems building and is really a partnership. It is driven by all of the needs of the countries that they work with. It's a very good partnership, and countries really rely on it. It's coming up for replenishment in early 2026. And then Education Cannot Wait, which supplies emergency funding for education systems that are dealing with conflict or climate disasters or other things that disrupt their systems, is also coming up for replenishment in 2026. So that's something that I think we can achieve, is retaining some funding to be able to support these really, really important multilateral funds that are kind of like Gavi and Global Funds, but focus on education. And we can also encourage the UK government to continue working on basic education. The US, one of the sectors that lost the most money after USAID withdrew was basic education. And not that many countries fund basic education. It's basically just the US and the UK. And then like a couple of other countries put minimal amounts, but they focus more on tertiary education, like, universities, like scholarships. And it's really important that we remind the UK that basic education needs to be the focus. So that's another thing that I think we talk about a little bit in the grassroots action. And then finally, I think that one thing that I think we'll be talking a lot more about going forward, but is this a really big part of our campaign also, is that only ultimately a small portion of funding for education comes from ODA. A huge part of making sure that every child is able to go to school and learn is getting domestic resources enabled so that countries can fund their own education systems. And even in low income countries where there's very little resources available, there's a lot that can be done to support those countries and being able to raise more revenue to be able to fund their education systems better, as well as restructure their debts and restructure their relationship with some of the big institutions that impose these policy decisions on them that end up restricting the amount that they can spend on public services like education. So the UK has a really, really big role in this. They have huge influence internationally, especially with the US stepping back kind of from the international sphere to change the way that these international institutions that are ultimately systemically really holding back countries from being able to have control over their budgets, their own domestic budgets, and working to make sure that countries aren't trapped in cycles of debt that they can't get out of and are spending more money on servicing debt and interest than they are on education. And this is something that you can also really raise your voice around, is the role that the UK has and how important it is that they play that role now that they're withdrawing ODA funding, that they need to step up and they need to make sure that we fix these systems internationally.
Thank you, Hannah. Again, huge amount in there. If you didn't kind of get it all straight away, don't worry. I've just put a link to the report that Hannah mentioned, which is just hot off the press last week. And that's got all of the detail on the different elements. So the UK's contribution, both through ODA, through helping on these big international systems, through the kind of time that we're at now in terms of the proportion of diminishing ODA that's going to education. It's all there. I will also in a minute just put a link to the action materials for the month in case any of you didn't find it easier to get it from that than from the email we sent you. Again, all of what just Hannah said in that last answer is summarized, and one of the things that when we were talking about this, putting together this month's action, I was thinking, why now? Why is the right moment when we've just had this catastrophic cut announced? How credible is it to ask for money for education? I think that very comprehensive answer you've given, Hannah, really gives that sense of that reprioritization, particularly in the spending review. So lots in there. I can see some questions coming up. So we're going to open the floor. Please just either unmute in the normal way, ask your questions of Hannah. We've got about 15 minutes. I've just put my phone number into the chat in case you'd like to text me your question, which is 07906 662 571. That's 07906 662 571. Or of course you can type your question into the chat and we'll read it out for the benefit of people who can't see that on their screens. So yeah, over to you guys. So let's have maybe the first question from the.
Okay, can I leap in?
Please do, Jo.
Can I go back to the first question? It was just appalling, the number of trained teachers, that the fall that there's been in that. Why is that? What's going on there? What are the factors involved, and can anything be done about it?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a specific answer for the reasons behind sub-Saharan Africa in particular and why that's been such a massive fall, but it's part of a global trend that I do know more about, which is that teachers are undervalued, they're underpaid, they are dealing with really, really tricky working conditions. It's getting harder and harder to recruit new teachers, young people who want to go into the profession. Even people who do want to go into the profession, they then only stay a couple of years because it's just really, really hard, and they're not getting the kinds of supports that they need. I mean, a lot of teachers are not even getting paid. It's that bad. Like they will go for months and months and months without a salary and are expected to still just show up every day and teach a classroom of 80 children, and they'll have gone to several years of training and university and will still get treated that way. So you can imagine why people would choose to, for, just their own like being able to sustain themselves and live, not stay in those kinds of situations. And a huge issue is that, like I said, with the fact that there are constraints being put on public budgets, and I saw somebody in the chat ask who the bad guys are here. The IMF is one of the main culprits in that. For countries that have taken debt out through the IMF, they often impose conditions on those countries that they have to follow in order to get their budget straight. And that involves cutting, in particular, wages. And teachers make up a huge proportion of the public sector employees. So when those cuts happen, teachers often bear the brunt of it. And so that's one of the reasons that is one of our main recommendations, is that a quality education relies on good teachers. And sorting this situation out relies on good teachers. And teachers ultimately are who we're talking about when we're talking about funding education. They make up by far the most of the budget that goes to education. It's like 70%. The other 30% is on everything else, like classrooms, books, whatever else you might need in terms of materials. You need human power for education. It's a relationship. It's a two-way relationship. Ed tech is not going to solve the issue. Like innovations aren't going to solve the issue. We need people. And I think that it comes down to just making sure there's enough money to pay teachers.
Thanks, Hannah. Really great the way you've linked that to the question on, who's actually causing the problems here, and I think you've answered that question from Ricky.
There's more actually. They're just one of the people. I don't know if people want to know who
if you want to list a few more baddies, feel free.
Yeah. So one of the main issues is just there's some really unequal governance around kind of rules around how our global financial system works, and a big issue for us also is tax. So tax is what pays for education ultimately. And I saw there's another question about other forms of funding, which I can come to next. But tax is what ultimately we really need to rely on. It's the most stable, sustainable, equitable, and accountable form of funding education. And public education really does need to be kind of at the heart of this, because there's all sorts of things that come into play when you rely too much on private funding. It's not really sustainable. it often leads to children with disabilities getting left out. The ones that cost the most money tend to be the ones that people don't want to fund. And so there's really, really big equity concerns with not having public education systems that are free and available to everybody. And so tax is governed currently by the OECD, which is, oh my gosh, the Organization for Economic
Cooperation
and Development. Yes, thank you. It's been a long day. And so the OECD, for those who know about it, it is kind of a wealthy countries club. So it only is like a small subset of the number of countries around the world. And they are often a lot of people that benefit from tax havens and some shady stuff with tax. So they're the ones making the rules currently. There are a lot of countries that have said, hey, we want to make our tax system better. We want to get rid of illicit financial flows. We want to be able to tax multinational companies. We want to be able to raise more revenue. And there are ways that we can do it, but your organization is holding us back from being able to do those things. And there's right now a really important movement happening to move governance on international tax from the OECD to the UN, where every country gets one vote. And the UK is currently one of 8 countries that is voting against that. And it's because the UK is responsible for 12.5% of global tax losses, I think. And we have a couple of tax havens that we're involved in. So there's a lot of motivation for rich countries to not participate in this kind of reform. The UK will not be able to be as shady if we were to kind of make these changes. But I think it's important for the UK to make those changes and to address them. So the OECD is one of those big organizations. The IMF is currently governing debt, and now people are saying we need to move debt to the UN too, so that every country has one vote, and it's not just the wealthy countries that have the most control over the IMF that are getting to make these decisions.
Thanks, Hannah. It's really interesting to see how obviously and directly this issue links through to these bigger systemic problems in the world. Just as we saw before Christmas with Sunnit talking about, his new report on bad loans, poor nutrition, we saw the direct link between service provision and some of these systemic problems that the UK has an influence on globally, and we're seeing exactly the same in education. So it's really important that across these different issues we're making those connections. And in theory, the British government, I can't remember when, it seems so long ago, but the last development secretary and the prime minister were, in the autumn talking about, oh yeah, well, we want to improve financial systems. Well, they can if they want, but that's not what they're prioritizing right now. So I think we've got a responsibility to hold them to that. And I think it's really great that Hannah and others are in that report showing the link between direct service provision on education and those things that the government could do some things about if it wanted, in addition to its ODA money.
Naveed, can
Gil,
I just interrupt? If anybody does want to disappear down this rabbit hole of tax and reform of the IMF and all the rest of it, CAFOD is running a mega campaign on it at the moment on debt relief. And they've got actions that you can take, and they've got a petition, and they've got lobbies of Parliament and all the rest of it. So if you do want to explore it further, have a look on their website. They've produced a really good report, and I've put the link to it there. It's not that I want to take away from us doing things for results, but if you are interested in that, which is underpinning everything else, go to that report and their website. It's got loads of stuff. Okay.
Thanks, Gil. And that's definitely not a rabbit hole. That's absolutely slap bang central in the issues, that people who, ourselves, CAFOD, and other allies need to be putting pressure on. Absolutely right. I've seen a question from Pete in the chat. Where can we see how the UK ODA pie is shared between sectors? Does that make sense? So how do we divide? How do you know how much of the UK's ODA money goes to different issues, goes to different sectors?
So we have we have a chart that's in our report. I can find the page, but it's somewhere in the middle of the report. I will have to look for you to find that page. But it shows kind of over time the way that education has looked compared to other sectors with bilateral money. So there's a difference between bilateral and multilateral, which I think you all will be familiar with. The UK reports on those things differently and separately. For a long time, though, for education, their multilateral spending was included in their bilateral spending. So it's not a whole picture that you see in the report, but for education, it's pretty much exactly what they were spending on education. They don't spend that much money on education through supporting core funding, which is what you call like kind of the operational costs for some of those big multilateral organizations like the World Bank and UNICEF. Education makes up a small portion of their budget too, and that's actually reducing those as well. So education is kind of falling off of the global agenda. It's not just the UK. But anyways, that's where you can kind of get one glimpse at it. But the way that we found all this information is through the UK's reporting on its development spending. So every year they release statistics on what they're spending on and the percentages and the amounts, and all the data that's in our report is sourced from those reports. They come out around September time every year. So if you really want to get into the weeds with things, you can look up the UK's international development statistics, and you can see exactly kind of the breakdown by issues of what they're spending on.
Thanks. You were talking about the chart. Is there a chart over time, say, you know, from 2000 to 2025 or something like that?
Yeah, so the one that we have in our report that Naveed linked in the chat, I'll find it now. It goes from 2013, I believe.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can maybe share my screen even.
Let me see.
That'd be great. Will's just said that that's on page 30 of the Send My Friend report. I've also put a link to Dev Tracker, which is, you know, they summarize all of the spending categories by country, by issue, which gives you a sort of a broad breakdown. Whether it will give you the granularity of changes over time that you're looking for, Pete, I think you need to start getting down into the details of the annual reports.
Page 13 of the Send My Friend.
30.
Oh, 30.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's good.
Thank you, Will. I might have been wrong actually looking at it now. That's page 19 that Hannah's showing. I think I was showing something else.
Page 19. There's a couple of graphs that we have in here. Yeah, this is the one that I think that you were interested in, Pete. Let me know if that's right. But yeah, this is from 2013. And a lot of things really saw a dip. Though health will be a little bit misleading because it spends more multilaterally. So this is bilateral numbers. Health spends a lot more multilaterally. So that decline is not quite reflective of what it's received. But education, it is reflective pretty much of what it receives.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Hannah. And so not everyone on the call will probably be able to see that graph, but when you get a moment, it's page 19 of the Send My Friend report that Hannah has shared, and that will be linked to in our action materials. When we put the post of this video, the video of this call, that will also be in the description, so you'll be able to see it all for yourself. We have got just 4 minutes left. I'm going to be bold and go for one last question before I wrap up. So has anybody got a question on the floor? Richard, you put your hand up first.
You may have covered this. I'm sure there's an organisation that money can be sent to sort of go round the governments and go direct, sort of cut out the middleman, as it were. Am I imagining that, or is that something in different countries they do have, that money can be given straight to the schools, but probably our government wouldn't do that, would it?
So, like, are you talking about going around to the UK government or going around the country governments?
Going to the donee countries from us.
Going like directly to the people.
Or to the schools, or to the local education authority, or sort of cut out the middleman, as it were. Yeah.
So there are people that are working on trying to make it easier for individual donors to donate to big joined up funds. It's something that currently is not possible on the scale that is really needed to be able to actually change things. There are lots of different kind of like non-state actors that are running schools that accept money. I'm sure there are like some programs that would donate to public schools around the different countries. I'm not sure I have a reliable one to suggest to you. There are lots of cases where and you do need to do your due diligence on this, because there are a lot of people that really market themselves well about providing education and doing an amazing service, and that end up being less than yeah, maybe I won't go into too much detail, but you can imagine there's some problems with a lot of these programs. So you do need to be careful about what you donate to. I wouldn't just assume that just because there's a school running and they're asking for money and they have an easy channel to give individual donor funds, that they're a good option. But
our government wouldn't countenance doing that. They have to go through audited channels through the governments, through the local government.
No, they have been actually investing in some for-profit schools that actually have had some pretty bad allegations of sexual abuse, which could be a whole nother topic. But we've actually just been signing some letters. There was a review by the Human Rights UN Committee for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights on the UK. And they found that even though the IFC has divested from this for-profit chain of low-fee private schools, so they call themselves the McDonald's of education, like education in a box. They just put education in slums usually, and then they charge like some of the poorest families in the world money to go to places where there's like hanging wires, and there's literally chicken wire on the windows, and like there have been some sexual abuse scandals. And we found that the UK is still invested in this company. But it's a complicated situation because they're technically not directly doing it. It's through an intermediary, so they don't have control. So there's a bunch of like lots of little things that really, are hard to get to change. And so that's why governance is so important. And that's why I focus a lot on kind of like the big picture systemic stuff, because the small individual things, they ultimately don't change the way that we work on these issues.
Thank you, Hannah. And that links through to a comment I've just seen from Ricky in the chat, I think, that for governments, it shows why the multilateral funds are so important. So you mentioned Global Partnership for Education, and Education Cannot Wait. So you don't have those problems of, rogue organizations or unaccountable organizations not delivering what, taxpayers across the donor countries would ideally expect their money to be doing. We have to end there. We have just gone over the time allowed to us. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening to a lot of stuff there. Special thanks to Hannah, who has covered that all with aplomb. A lot of stuff that you shared with us, and I know that people will really appreciate how you've brought all of that together, and in a really comprehensible way. And I hope that will be useful for your actions this month, if you're able to take them. As I said, they are summarized in our action materials. There's the full report, which we've shared, and in the action materials, as always, there's links to further information and more reading. You can always get in touch with us, and we'll try and answer any questions you've got as best we can. So just before we close, I just want to link to a consultation we did. We asked you last month if you would tell us which is the best day for you for these conference calls, and then we sent a link out in an email, and it was the wrong link. So really, I'm sorry to shut you all out of our poll. So I put the link. We sent out the link is now in the chat there, so you can actually tell us which is your preferred day. So we will settle on a day that works for the most people.
Naveed,
So yeah,
Naveed, can I just chip in? Because I saw that, clicked on the link, and it told me I'd already submitted a response.
Oh, and had you? No.
Yes, I had. Yes,
Yeah.
I had. So,
okay.
So whatever it was, it worked for me.
It worked for you. Great. We did send that one wrong version of the link. The right one should be out there, but it's now in the chat. That is the right version. Apologies for that. So we're going to finish up now. Thank you again, Hannah. Thank you to everybody else. If anyone wants to stay for an informal chat, we'll keep the line open for an extra up to half an hour or so. But you know, this is the formal end of the meeting, end of the formal part of the meeting. So thank you ever so much, everybody. And if you're not staying, enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Night.
Bye-bye. Thank
Good
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Hannah.
you.
Good job.
Thanks.
Bye, Peter.
Sorry, I was doing the form.
I'm doing the form too.
We honestly, it's so embarrassing when you think you're helping somebody and then the link doesn't work. It's so easy to do, but hopefully that's right now. Yeah.
I'm going to jump off now. Thanks. Thank you very much, Naveed, and
Thanks, Will.
really nice to meet everyone.
Nice to
And
meet you.
Well,
be in touch soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye.
Yeah, if anybody has any more questions about education, happy to stay on, but if not, I'll hop off as well.
I've got millions.
It's really
I
depressing.
can come back.
I'm
happy to come back and do more education actions. But
we can do that. Yeah, we can do a sort of, I don't know, education masterclass or something. But literally, anyone's got any questions, you can pass them my way, and you know, we can field them off to Hannah or another colleague who's, you know, working directly on this stuff and you know, knows all the details.
Okay, I don't know if I can.
I'm feeling very torn because I've been in education all my life as a teacher, and yet I just think that health is so important. If you haven't got good health, then you're not going to benefit from an education. And I'm conscious that whatever we're doing, we're taking money from one pot to give to another. You know, I just
that's where I want us to not fall into, though, because that's not true, and we don't want to take away from health. So it needs to be part of a whole package and think holistically, because yes, health is really important. But then there's also life and you know, living with that health and that what you do with that life, and it ultimately does have health impacts if you don't have education. Like people who are not educated suffer more health issues. They find themselves more vulnerable in situations. They're not educated on how to, you know, keep themselves healthy. Education has a huge role in health. And then also you can't educate enough doctors to provide those roles who are embedded in the communities that are receiving those health services. Like you need to have community members who know how to respond to their community's needs, and that's education. Otherwise, we perpetuate this system with just the elites going to school, and like for any kind of health inequities, when you don't have people from the community who are a part of that health system, who are educated, you don't have as good outcomes. And so it's a part of a holistic way of seeing how societies actually work. And there are other places that the UK is spending money on that are not these basic services that they could stop spending money on.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking, Jill, when you kind of expressed that concern, was that thing that I was mentioning about the nutrition integration. So there's this good news report, we called it. It's on our website under publications. Yeah, publications. Which is showing the examples of when you do both education and health and nutrition together. So, you know, there's an example of a school meals program in Uganda and a preschool nutrition intervention in Kenya, or I might have got that the wrong way round.
Which is which reports that?
It's called let me find the name of it. It's literally just gone up last week. Hang on. So this is what they were launching essentially in Paris last week. It's called Good News on Nutrition Briefing 2 Integration. And so it's talking about nutrition and schools, basically how that really works, how both things work together. It doesn't, I think what Hannah was just saying was like the bigger picture, but if you want to do development interventions and it's not competitive, this might be another way of looking at it.
What was it called? Good News
on Nutrition and Integration.
Good News on Nutrition Briefing 2 Integration. I'm just going to put the link for you.
Oh, thank you.
Still got the chat box open. Hang on.
Briefing.
Oh, why won't it do it? I'm having a real nightmare over cutting and pasting today. That's really sad, isn't it? Cutting and pasting nightmare.
We're going to miss you, Naveed.
Cut and paste king. I'll put it there. Keep talking.
Yeah, I mean, I think also I can just reflect on my own like experiences. I went to a school that was in a low income area in the United States, and we had tons of health services through the school as like a community hub. Like I got dental care through my school. There were constantly people who were coming to our school to kind of, because it's just a place where you can very easily like kind of gather people and make sure that parents are there and involved, and ensure that it's like, teachers are also there keeping eyes on students and are able to see where their needs might be. People who would normally slip through the cracks or not receive care. Schools have a huge role to play in a day-to-day sense as well as the bigger picture. And that integration briefing is kind of a good glimpse into kind of thinking about like all these kind of like not obvious ways that all these different systems support each other and work together.
I have a question, but I don't want to get in the way of existing questions. So just bear in mind, put a bookmark in. Pete has a question.
Yeah,
we all want to know what it is now.
We want to know what it is now, yeah.
Well, I want to see the link. Where's the link? Oh, there it is.
I'll just put it in the chat, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so my question concerns something you said earlier, Hannah, which was about there were obstacles in the way of local initiatives. You were talking about local funding was much greater than actual UK aid on education. Did I get that right?
Yeah, domestic resources. So yeah, that's
domestic.
Yeah,
okay. So,
within countries.
But you also said that there were obstacles to local funding of education.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't figure out what those obstacles were. So can you help me?
Yeah.
There's two guys that are going. Good to see you.
Okay.
Peter and Glenn, are you waving because you're leaving?
You're coming.
Oh, yes, they were.
They've gone. Yes, they were.
Timing.
Yeah. So the obstacles, and this, I go into detail about this in the report if you want to read more. But they're kind of in the buckets of tax, which we talked a little bit about. It's like the issues with the OECD creating rules that make it really hard for countries to be able to stop illicit financial flows, tax extractive companies. There are a lot of companies that are owned by very wealthy countries or big, high net worth individuals that aren't paying tax in those countries. They're extracting it and paying tax elsewhere. And they want to be able to tax those companies, and they're not allowed to under the ways that the global tax rules kind of shake out. And a lot of those companies just go to tax havens. They register in tax havens, and that's how they get out of paying.
Well, that's us, the UK.
That's us, the UK, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're participating in keeping it that way by voting against this effort to try to move the rule making to the UN, which is really disappointing.
I used to, full disclosure, I used to work for a tax haven.
Did you really?
I used to report the laws of the island of Jersey, and huge sums of money were being litigated all the time, just because they were there. The fact that it was where there was so much money, then there was litigation about why it was there and should it be there, and enormous numbers of lawyers making a living off this fact that the British, and obviously that's one of the fact that that route is there to salt your money away is one of the reasons why the London Stock Exchange is so wealthy as well. So like it's going to be a really tricky issue to get that sorted, but it's absolutely essential. Like we've been defrauding the rest of the world since about 1947 with these things. It's awful.
I think we've got like 12 British protectorate tax agents.
The company I used to work for did the law reporting for all of them. So we did Jersey, Cayman Islands. We didn't do the Isle of Man.
Virgin Islands, the Virgin
We
Islands.
didn't do British Virgin Islands, but they're there as well. Yeah, and even the Falkland Islands was starting to come up in that way as well.
Yeah. So why are they?
But beyond that, there's more to there's also the IMF has estimated that most countries, even the really low income ones, could raise their tax to GDP ratio by a lot, by 5%, 5 percentage points. There's a difference between percent and percentage points. They don't recommend it though. They recommend cuts instead. So there's this real kind of ideological side of things where the IMF has done its own research on this and has found that most low income countries could be raising more tax. But when they are advising countries who are in debt distress or who have taken out emergency debt from the IMF, they instead advise austerity, which then leads to cuts to public sector wage bills, which then leads to cuts to teachers. So there's also those kinds of policy advice things presenting barriers because countries don't really have a choice but to go along with what the IMF says. They've got a lot of power and they are also countries with a lot of debt, and the IMF is kind of coming in to try to right their ships, and they don't have control over how they do that.
So
and then the debt issue is another huge barrier, which
is this something we can be lobbying on in the future, writing to the IMF? I know we write to our MPs about a lot of things. We've written to the World Bank about a lot of things over the years. Should we be writing to whoever is responsible for all this stuff to try and sort it out?
We'll need to find out ways in which that is going to be effective, Richard. I mean, I know we can write. So we've got governments have seats on the governance board of the World Bank, so that gives us a route for political power on the World Bank. IMF, I'm not so sure, but I think we're definitely coming back to this. I don't quite know when or how, but we'll need to help.
If we were given the notes to get the wording right, we could all write.
Yeah, but it's finding the right people. If you're going to write to a figure who's technically the head of a body, but they don't give a crap, basically, there's not a lot of point. So it's having that.
Well, if there's an email, I always think that is a point because it's just an email. It's not.
True.
Isn't it time we had a Results International lobby campaign?
Yeah, it depends. I suppose I have regular, not very practical, I have to say, very motivational meetings with the other people in Results who have grassroots volunteers. And we're always working on the same things, but our targets are different. So say we're all working on the Global Fund. The Americans are working on their appropriations process to get a 1-year replenishment of their funding for the Global Fund. We're doing it in our way. A colleague in Zambia will be doing something different, but all working on access to Global Fund resources. And whilst we're doing the same thing, the ask is different. I can imagine, though, that if we found the right target for something like the World Bank, we could do that. But
we've done it before. We've done it.
There's one opportunity that's coming up that is pretty important for maybe reshaping things. It's called the Financing for Development Conference. It's happening in the end of June, early July. And a lot of civil society around the world is pushing for countries like the UK to come and really participate in there, because they're trying to fix some of these issues with like the IMF. So the IMF and the World Bank, they're Bretton Woods institutions. There are a lot of people who think that those shouldn't exist anymore, that they're just out of date, they're not fit for purpose. And there are a lot of these conversations about how we can like fundamentally kind of reform this architecture, like beyond just appealing to them, but like reforming it, remaking like our vision for how we do this work. And I think that there's something there to like push MPs to then try to get the UK to play ball more.
I'd like to see that. I think if we could do some, join up with other people around the world for that moment, I'd love it if we could manage to make that happen. But we'll have to consult with other colleagues and see what we can make that look like, because I don't personally know what the kind of global mechanisms are yet. But
I've got to go now. Could you just tell us what that was called again, Hannah? That thing you said.
It's the 4th Financing for Development Conference.
Fourth financing factor.
What would be the most effective action that we could do as an advocacy network to get Britain into it, get them involved?
I would need to probably just, I've been asking this question with people that are more involved in this conference than I am. I've been like trying to kind of like scope this out for Univies to figure out
I've been
who the
asking
right
this
targets are and
question
pressure
as
points.
well. We're digging away. We will get there, but we're not quite there yet, because a lot of people are going away and they're bringing their own sort of issue perspectives to it. They've got different ideas, and in different countries they've got different mechanisms for collaboration. So we've got a little bit of work to do, but I'm really hoping we can do something around that.
But it's June. It's like next week.
I know. I've been talking about this for months, but like, yeah, you do what you can. These conferences only come around every 10 years. Like the 3rd Financing for Development conference was in 2015. So like, it's quite a big moment.
It's a big moment.
Been working on this for a few months. I couldn't agree more, Pete.
I've got to go now, so thanks everybody.
Cheers,
Thanks,
Richard.
Hannah.
Thanks, Richard.
See you,
Richard, if you do, oh, he's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Jill, I was
Because
reminded about when I first started at Results, and I think it was the same evening I came to meet the Store Valley group, Pete, but Jill invited me over to Much Hadnam and the epilepsy, the St Elizabeth Centre, and you were talking just now about health and education, and you invited me to come and see this place, and it was amazing the work they're doing. So Hannah, this is like a centre of excellence in the UK for treatment of children with severe epilepsy, and I saw the most amazing things around supporting their individual conditions, helping their learning, and like, I couldn't say whether that was about health or education. It was kind of about both, and it was about more. And I'll always remember that that day, Jill. I'm always grateful that you invited me down to come and see that.
Oh, thank you. Well, just to give an update on that, they've gone from strength to strength since then, and the school is expanding at the rate of knots. And Hertfordshire Education Authority were Ofsteded, and they got glowing Ofsteds, and then they looked at their SEN provision, and they got absolutely slated for it. So they said, well, we're going to have to do something about it. So they asked St Elizabeth's if they would take in as day children their children with special educational needs, that they weren't getting provision. So they've got this vast intake of 5- and 6-year-olds. They've got all these little children running around, which is absolutely great. And they come in for the day, and they're opening it up to like forest school type learning and all sorts of things. And they've got children that are blind, others that are deaf, partially sighted, all children with learning difficulties, not just with epilepsy, although that is the specialism, autism, and they're just going from strength to strength, which is wonderful, because it was in the doldrums a bit. I didn't want to ask about special education, Hannah, because that's my interest, and we have done a lot of work on that, haven't we, Pete?
Yeah.
In the past, about getting, because, you know, I think, well, if the money's not there, okay, the money's not there, but we can look at policy changes, you know, like we got the UK government, DFID, every school that was built by DFID had access for children with special needs. That was part of their policy, and we got that policy change. I think if the money's not there because of the ODA budget, it's not there, and it's probably not going to change. But we can look at policy changes, and maybe that's what we ought to be looking at as well, you know. Which is why I asked
For
about
me, that's why the
teachers.
debt stuff's so important, because the British government have even
Yeah,
said,
it
yeah, we
is.
want to be looking at this. So you think, right, good, now's the time, you know.
Well,
Yeah, I think
which-
that, I mean, the role of the UK now working on these issues has really changed. They've moved into kind of a different space. They're not doing any kind of provision anymore. They're not building schools or doing that kind of thing. They are very involved in disability inclusive things, which is good. So they're currently at a conference for disability inclusion. I know a bunch
Really?
of the people at the
Is
Girls
he-
Education Department are attending the Disability Inclusive Summit that's happening right now.
All right, what's it called?
And Disability Inclusive Summit, Disability Inclusion Summit. Is it
Right.
in Paris?
So that they're still committed to that. Is there a team?
They are, and
that,
they signed a call to action around you know, kind of the same benchmark that we were talking about, 15%. They've signed on to a benchmark within the education budget to have 5% of the amount of money that's spent on education go to disability inclusive
Oh, brilliant!
education.
Because
Mhm.
we did an awful lot of work on disability, and we brought it up at every available opportunity. But it's not something, Naveed, that we've got the capacity for anymore, is it?
Not at the
It's called
moment.
the
no.
Global Disability Summit. My apologies. Global Disability Summit. And it's in Berlin. Yeah, I think that it's tricky. It is something that I think is really important, and something that we advocate for through kind of our language around you know, not making sure that the most marginalized children are included and centering their efforts around that. So making sure that children that are historically left out of education systems, which includes children of all kinds of disabilities, we bring that kind of angle in. And for my friend, she's actually just stepped down, but our co-chair was the Sight Savers policy advisor, and who's very, very focused on Disability Inclusive Summit. So because we're so involved in Send My Friend to School at Results, I'm a co-chair for Send My Friend. We do a lot of work through Send My Friend that's related to disability, even though we don't do as much work on it ourselves. So it's not gone away, it's just changed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that FCDO haven't dropped the ball on it, because
yeah, I'm sure that they could do better on things, and
well,
there's not a lot of clarity, I think, on kind of they could improve their reporting on how they do this work and how much money they're actually spending. There's not as much transparency as we would like, but they talk about it.
Could we do an action on that?
Sure. Yeah, maybe in the future. Yeah, it's hard to do actions on everything. There's so many things to do actions. But
we
I
have
think
a sort of
statistics,
planning process every month. We think, like, what's the best thing for us to do now? And I'd love us to think a bit more further ahead, actually. And sometimes we just don't know enough, such as with this financing for development.
No, there's too much. I mean, resources are limited, you know, fair enough.
But that is an important one, and it would speak to our history and our sort of position with the links that Hannah was mentioning, and to be able to do something. So yeah, let's put it in the mix. I won't make any promises, but we can have a chat after this call and see where that thought takes us.
Well, I'm always interested in monitoring and reporting. I see that as central.
Yeah.
And we haven't done much of that. I don't know if this is a sensitive question, but are we less obliged to follow the TB campaign trail because we're getting less money from Bill Gates?
It's probably the opposite. It's probably the opposite. So they have, their funding for us has gone down over the last year, and then next year it's slightly lower than it has been. Hence the changes that I sort of mentioned. And the nutrition part of their funding has reduced, and there's a separate grant that Hannah knows about, which we're talking about, that foundational learning piece, which is yet to be nailed down. But the proportion of TB, I would say, is higher now than it was five years ago, and so it's great. I mean, we're the only organisation in the UK doing this work. There's other people who do bits of it, but on TB specifically, we are the only ones. So it's not bad. It's just that it does skew things, and it makes it difficult for us to, balance the organisational funding. So the answer is quite the opposite, Pete, actually.
Good.
Which is why
that's good. Yeah, that's good.
But we also need to get other sources of funding. That's why that's so important for us to. So this foundational learning grant, it's good if we can get that, which I think there's every sign we will. That'll be amazing. Foundational learning. That's another Gates-funded piece. But historically, we were struggling to fund education until the last couple of years, and now we've got a good number of staff being able to devote their time to it. And we want that to be able to carry on. And also the other aspects of health, the child health work, we need to be able to carry it on. The nutrition work, we would like to be able to carry it on. And just over time, the funding for these sort of ebbs and flows a little bit. And we try to keep that ebbing and flowing to be as least disruptive to what we would like to do as possible. But inevitably, it has an impact.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being honest.
Our funding is so complicated for a small organisation. It's a bit of a nightmare. Look, I think I'm going to call it a day if that's all right. It's coming up.
Okay, that's great.
Hannah, thank you so much for staying with us, and thank you for being with us tonight. It was really brilliant.
It's been really good.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, I'm always happy also to answer about education.
Great.
And I hope that you get some responses from people. I'm really hoping that this grassroots action is impactful. So thank you in advance.
This is a great after-conf chat. I love it.
I like these.
Yeah, I know.
They really help. I'm really pleased we do them.
I just found the debt stuff that we did before Christmas so fundamental, to what was going on. It was going to release money for also, it was stopping things being done for all sorts of reasons. So
really, you should have a look at the third recommendation in the report. I think you'd be really interested in about just kind of like releasing more money, like all over the place. There's so many opportunities for more money that's not ODA. We talk about it in the report. It might be including debt. It might be quite interesting to you.
Yeah, that was my question. But when I started, because I hadn't really looked at the CAFOD stuff, when I looked at what they were doing, like their chief economics person is a lady called Maria Finnerty, and she used to work for the Tax Alliance. But they've got this major campaign on debt, and she's written such a brilliant report with the recommendations that we were talking about tonight. I mean, all the things
we've signed on to
IMF.
some of their stuff, and they're part of Semi Friend of School, so we've got some
and I know Sunit's also been in touch, and Hannah, you won't know that Jill managed to connect us up with a current staff member as well through their chief exec. So we've made some good connections with CAFOD.
CAFOD actually, they spoke at our launch event for this report.
Oh, great. Andrea, is it Andrea Speranza? Just let me have a look. Yeah, Andrea Speranza. She's the campaign's engagement manager, and she's leads on Fix the Food System campaign. They've got a Fix the Food System campaign.
I think she's the one who's in touch with Sunit.
Yeah, okay. So Andrea and Maria are going to be the chief speakers on this day's conference that I'm organising. I'm just so excited.
Oh, that's great.
I'm so glad that they've agreed to take it on. so I've had a meeting with Andrea, and we've got another one in May because she's going back to Argentina for a bit, and it's just going to be great, you know. But I think, you know, we really need to be looking at those fundamental things. I mean, so many of us have got Liberal Democrat MPs actually in the network. It's quite interesting, and you know, they're open to hearing about things like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think now's the time to push on it for sure. Do
Yeah.
let us know how
Okay,
that
must
conference
go.
gets on,
Sorry.
Jill. We'll follow that up because it would be lovely to hear about how that develops. But yeah,
Yeah.
let's
Okay,
call it
great.
an evening for now. Thanks everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye,
Thank you.
All
Pete.
right, thanks.
Bye, bye,
Good
bye,
night.
Jill.
Bye, Pete.
Bye.
Bye, Naveed. See
Bye.
ya.